So let's get stuck in. Now, so just very briefly, John McGrath is my name. I'm a trainer in Microsoft Office, and I teach project management for over 25 years. I probably deliver about 100 Excel courses a year. I've also built financial models for the World Bank and various other organizations. But the more I learn about Excel, the more I realize about it is that there's an easy way and there's a hard way. So the problem is there are 10 hard ways and the 11th way is the easy way. So most people who use Excel find it quite difficult because they're doing things incorrectly. So in terms of trying to appeal to an audience of such a broad audience with different levels, my goal is to try and have nobody lost and nobody bored. So I've got to kind of pitch somewhere in the middle. So what I've done is I've built a series of worksheets along the bottom just to try and minimize the amount of time I'll be typing. And we'll go through it. It doesn't get more advanced. Certainly, there are certain formulas you might find a little bit more difficult. Probably if you think about what we're going to cover in the hour is probably the equivalent of a day's training. So I would say the goal of this webinar is not to teach you every little thing here in Excel, but it's to open your eyes to a smarter way of actually doing things in Excel. So let's get stuck in. I will keep an eye on the chats, but as you can imagine, I'm actually here on my own. If there's 500 people, I won't really get to look at the chats at the end, but I will switch on them and I'm watching the clock. So what I'm starting with here is a very typical sort of chaotic spreadsheet. So I've just called it forensic, as you can see in the bottom tab. So I'll zoom in as much as possible to make the screen as large as I can. So this is the classic sort of spreadsheet that somebody emails you and you open the attachment and your first reaction is, what the hell is going on here? So you can see it's quite chaotic. There's this kind of reasonable table on the left in column A and B. But when I go to the right, I see all these random numbers just typed all over the place. And I'm trying to figure out, are they raw numbers? Are they formulas? What do they actually do here? So the most important thing to do when you get that type of spreadsheet in, you want to audit it. Well, the first thing is you make a copy of the spreadsheet, and the whole idea is you keep your original. The same principle would apply if you open a spreadsheet on the network. This could be the single source of truth for this particular file, so you've got to be very careful going in editing it. So it's a really handy trick on how to copy a sheet in Excel. So if we look at the sheet tab down the bottom called Forensic, now most people will know how to move their sheets around. It's a simple drag and drop technique as I'm demonstrating here. But you can actually use something very similar for copying. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to drag it a little bit to the right, hold down Control, let go, and I have Forensic 2, which is an identical copy of the spreadsheet. So essentially, this is intact. This remains pure. It's not going to be in any way edited. But what I'm going to go in here now is I'm going to have a good crunch at this data to try and understand it. Now, the most important shortcut to know in Excel is how to almost X-ray your Excel. So when somebody sends you in a file like this, the classic thing that most users will do, I'll just zoom in, try and keep it a little bit larger, they will start clicking around and trying to figure out, is this a number? Or is it a formula? So I can see that's a number, but I click down here and I see that's a sum. Over here, it's a raw number. Over here, it's a calculation. So that's a kind of a chaotic way of doing it. So best practice in Excel, if you want to find where all your formulas are in an instant, we use Control and the button under Escape. And as you can see, suddenly it opens up and I can see there are actually only 3 formulas on this spreadsheet. So Control and the button under Escape, technically we call that button backquote, but from a practical point of view, I think people just remember it better as the button under Escape. Now, technically what that is actually doing, which is why I dropped my zoom down, if we take a little closer look at this, when I use Control and the button under Escape, not only does it expose the raw value, it also widens all the columns to twice their current width, just giving me a little bit more room to see the formula. So I can actually see this is a great confidence boost here. As chaotic as the spreadsheet is, there's nothing too complicated in there that I'm not going to figure out. But the problem now is when I close the formulas, I have to have a forensic photographic memory to remember what's a formula and what's a raw value. So this leads to probably one of the second most important shortcuts in Excel, the go-to function. Now, go-to can be accessed by using Control and G, and that will allow me to navigate to a specific cell. So if we were on the phone here, which is probably happening every day, and somebody says, John, I think you've got the wrong value in BZ123. So if that was the case, rather than trying to manually navigate it, I could go BZ123, and in an instant, I've jumped down and I found that cell. So that's a useful feature, but it's not where I'm going to use go to. In the context here of formula auditing, I'm going to go Control and G, and I'm not going to go to a cell. I'm going to go to a cell type called formulas. So I'm actually going to get Excel to find all the formulas in my Excel spreadsheet. Now I can see them using the shortcut, we know that, but now it's highlighted all of them. And I simply go now and turn on a color, bold. I'll turn on yellow here just to make it obvious in the webinar. And now within this spreadsheet, while I'm working, I can see everything that's a formula and everything that it's a raw value. So there's no risk of me overwriting any previous formula. Now I still need to figure out how this spreadsheet was put together. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to take one of my formulas, and I can see this one is a little bit, I'll just double click here so you guys can see it in case anyone's on a small device. I'll just zoom in a bit. So if we just take a look at this formula here, the 21, I can see it's the formula, etc. Now, if I'm to audit that, I can see the numbers here, they're highlighting in Excel, but a much smarter way of figuring out what's driving that formula is I simply go to my formulas tab and I tell it to trace my precedence, what's before it. And in an instant, it finds every cell that's actually driving that in Excel. So these are as such the inputs to that formula. Now I want to know what does that formula do, and I now hit trace dependence, and I can now see that that formula actually now is also driving the 119, and I can say, well, does that go any further? And once again, I go trace dependence, and in this case, I can actually see that's the end of the road. We'll just try this here, trace dependence. So that formula actually doesn't go any further. But let's take a look at this formula now here, and I go to trace precedence, and as you can imagine, it's showing me it's all the numbers above, which we'd expect. But now when I go trace dependence this time, I can see it goes to the 119, and in the same idea, I can see it's gone across. Now, if I was to take, so in this particular case, what it's actually doing is it's almost allowing me to follow the forensic trail, and that will go across worksheets and even workbooks if need be as well. So I'm just going to remove these, remove arrows, and I'm back to a standard spreadsheet. Now, the other thing you can do in Excel, when you see an awkward looking formula like this, you can take part of a formula or the entire formula. So for example, I could just go in here and take that small piece of it. And when I hit function key 9, I force Excel to calculate and tell me what the value actually is. So you can see the idea, just select any part of a formula, F9, and that formula is simply 3 minus 7. Now, if I hit enter, I'll keep it, which is okay to do because I have a copy, but I'm actually going to escape. And I'm going to try and simplify that because that's the most awkward formula on the spreadsheet. And I'm going to select the entire formula this time, F9, and it simply changes to a 21. So I'm just going to check, are you okay with AB? Okay, great. Okay, now I've just got a message here to say some people can't hear, so we'll just take a little look. So maybe I just a few people on the screen. I would imagine it might be just, if one person can hear, everyone should have the ability. I just see a couple of you still have your monitors on, which is actually great. Your camera's on. You might give me a thumbs up if the audio is okay, guys, is it? Okay, so just apologies to anyone else, but it's a one-to-many relationship. So if the settings are coming out of here right, they must be right on the other end. It's something with your own device. Because it, and if there's any problem in the internet connection, it should come up to tell me that it's unstable. I'm recording this as well, so I will share it afterwards as well. And I may actually record it at a slower pace, just because we are going a little bit fast in the webinar. Okay, so I'll just do that one last time because that's quite important here. So I'm going to go in here, I select the entire formula, I hit function key 9, and it actually forces Excel to calculate as such. So if I want to keep it, I press enter, and now I can actually see that's simply a 21. But the whole essence of this is there's no problem doing this because remember, I made a copy of my original spreadsheet. So this is purely an audit and understanding of what's going on in my Excel. Okay, that's just giving you a helicopter overview how you audit Excel. I'm now going to move to visual, and I suppose that perhaps is something maybe for a more intermediate to advanced, the idea of formula editing. the next thing I'm going to look at, the visual display of Excel would appeal to probably all users. So what I'm going to do here first is I'm going to generate just some random values here between, let's say, -10 and 100. So this is quite a clever form for just testing dynamic Excel. So you can see there it's randomly put in a number as I drag down and as I drag across, and it's just generated a series of random values. I'll just take out the Sparklines because that's one of the techniques I want to show you. Now, this is really, I suppose it's really a test type of environment. As I go in and change anything, you can see the numbers recalculate, they change all the time. I'm just going to best fit these columns, just double click between any of them while they're selected. And what I want to do now is, first of all, most people use the chart in Excel. That's a sort of bread and butter visual technique in Excel. And by the way, we're going to have a look at pivot tables, so we're going to look at pivot charting as well. But there's a really simple, handy way of building a chart in Excel. And all you do is simply select your data. I'm just going to select here the months. In fact, I'll leave out the total. Now, if you want to build a chart super fast in Excel, you select data and simply press function key 11, so F11 up on top, and in half a second, it builds a chart in Excel for you. So simply select data, F11, and it will build a chart for you in literally 1 second. That technique works in pivot tables as well, and that's why it's a really powerful feature. You can make, you know, I suppose an advanced technique, pivot charts as opposed to pivot tables, really quick, really simple. Now, so what we did there, let's just think about this. This is definitely a top 5 shortcut in Excel. Select data, F11 will build a chart. Now, you might notice the chart went into the other spreadsheet. Now, what I want to show you is how I build a chart within the spreadsheet, just dropping the zoom so we can see it a bit clearer. This time I select my data as I've done. Alt and F1 will build a chart within the spreadsheet. So by just going Alt and F1, I've now built the chart within it. And obviously I can go in and change the chart, etc. Just the usual stuff that you would do previous. So 2 very important techniques for charting. Select data, F11 for an external chart. For a chart within the spreadsheet, Alt and F1. Now, that's the kind of bread and butter visual technique in Excel. I want to show you some other very simple but very powerful techniques here. So I'm going to increase the zoom again, guys. Just conscious, some people might be watching this on a screen, a big monitor, and some people may be watching it on a phone. So I'm just trying to keep the screen as large as I can. Now, one of the really powerful visual tools in Excel, and probably 95% of Excel users don't use this, is a feature called Sparklines. So I want us to take a look here, and I have here my months down the side, I have my countries across the top, but what I'd like to do is analyze the trend in my data for each month. Now, we kind of did that in the chart, but it doesn't have that kind of clarity that I'm looking for. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to use a Sparkline, very similar to a chart. It's really a micro chart. I go Insert, and everyone sees the charts, but most people never notice we have Sparklines here. So I'm going to choose Line, and it comes up and it asks me to choose the data that you want, which is really just select the data you want to use. I'll click over here, handy shortcut to select across, Control Shift and arrow right, and I select my data. I now hit enter, and we can actually see a visual chart. So you can see the trend in January. As I drag down, we can now see the trend for all the months. And as I go in now, because I use the ran between, every time I enter or change, you can actually see the idea. My Sparklines are changing in real time. Now, we might remember, though, I put in a range between -10 and 100. And the idea was that is I wanted to have some negatives in there. So in my role, let's imagine a negative is a major issue. It's a quality defect or something like that, and I need to investigate it. So at the moment, the negatives aren't really jumping out at me. This could be data coming off a production line or something, or maybe it's a stock price or something. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get Excel to visually indicate to me wherever there's a negative. So to do that, now the feature I'm using here is called a Sparkline. So I go up to my Sparkline tools, I hit design, and I simply tell Excel, show me all the negative points. And you can actually see there, the little red dot is appearing wherever there are negatives. Again, if I change anything, we see the negatives start changing. So Sparklines is a very useful technique, especially anything around metrics or quality or analysis. It's much easier to analyze you know, whatever I've got there, 100 cells using a Sparkline than to use a standard numeric. Now I'm going to put in a row above here. Shortcut to put in a row, Control Shift and plus, and it puts in a row. Same idea for column, Control Shift and plus, and it puts in a column. If I want to delete it, Control and minus is the shortcut to delete. Now I do want to keep the top row here because I want to show you an alternative Sparkline here. And this time I'm going to go almost the same, insert. I go over to column this time. Same idea, data range. I'll select my data, Control Shift down, enter, and I've built a chart Sparkline. I'll drag over and I'll give this just a little bit of height, as we can see. And this time I'm interested in peaks. I want to see any time there's a peak in my data. So same concept, I go back into my Sparkline design and I tell Excel, indicate wherever there's a peak. And you can now see my reds, all these peaks are, you can color change, etc. Again, if I go in and change this, you can see that the peaks are moving as I edit the data. So Sparklines is a very clever technique to use in Excel. We've used the line. We've also used the column. There is a win or lose, which is really just a positive, negative. I don't find that useful. I'm just trying to get as much in the time. I'm going to skip that one, but it's the exact same technique. Now, the next visual technique we're going to look at here is what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to find duplicates in my data. So I'm going to select this list here. And the easiest way, and again, you could write a formula to find duplicates, but we're interested in the easy way of using Excel. So we go Home, Conditional Formatting, Highlight Cell Rules. That's the Home tab on the ribbon, Conditional Formatting, and I choose Duplicate Values. And in an instant, you can see Excel has found the duplicates. But what's very clever about this, it works for text as well. Now, there's obviously no duplicates on my months here, but let's have a look at this. I select Conditional Formatting, Highlight Cell Rules, Duplicate Values. Now, when we do this, we actually see that I'm good to go. There's no problem in the data. But if I want to put in, for example, Feb again here for February, it finds that's a duplicate. And what's really smart about this is even if I was to put in lowercase Jan, as I've done here, it still picks it up. So it doesn't get confused by formatting. Very powerful technique in how you find your duplicates in Excel. How did we do it? Home, Conditional Formatting, Highlight Cell Rules, and down to Duplicate Values. Now, the other visual technique that I really like in Excel is similar to that. I'm going to select this data this time, and I'm going to go to Home, Conditional Formatting, and Data Bars. I'm really picking out the high value techniques here. I'm not going to go through all of them. But Data Bars gives you the chart effect within the cell. You don't have to build a separate chart. So I now choose here, I click in the blue, and as you can see there, it has indicated a chart within it. And again, it spotted the negative trend, and you can now see it changing. By the way, if I wanted to recreate that in another column, I wouldn't need to go back up and do it. I could simply select a single cell that has that properties, Format Painter, Paintbrush, more a word command, but really useful in Excel. Now I select my data and I'm getting the same effect here. So these are just, you know, we started off with pretty simple data and we've obviously made it a lot more visual now, etc. So now the next feature that I want to look at is how you create a drop-down list in Excel. So this is kind of one of the challenges people often have difficulty with, or they ask me in the training course. So it's actually quite straightforward. So again, just to save me typing, I've got month and country pre-typed in here. And what I want to get Excel to do is to build a drop-down based on all my months here. So the drop-down feature is contained in data. And if we go to data validation, and you see by default, Excel says any value is allowed. Well, I want to say, no, it has to be from a list. It asks me to define the source for the list. I select my cells, Control Shift down, and I hit OK. We can actually see, whoops, I'm just going to do that maybe on there. So I should have done that in the other cell. That's okay. I'll just undo, Control Z, shortcut to undo. I'll just do that one again. Data validation. Allow list, my source, Control Shift down, enter, and now I've built a drop-down list based on the values. Let's do it with the countries, exact same idea. data, data validation, and allow any value list. I go to the source. Now, slightly different this time, guys, is I'm going to look at these two tabs, which again, most Excel users ignore: my input message and my alert. So I can actually give a warning to this. So I could actually even, or caution the user on what to do. So I'm simply going to tell it here, use drop down. And then I'm going to tell it, please select. You get the idea. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to allow the user that they can proceed with a value that isn't on the list, but I'm going to caution them that it wasn't the value we expected. So my error alert is not going to be a stop, it's going to be a warning. And I'm going to say unknown. And I might just say here, you know, are you sure? Do you want to proceed? Whatever the case may be. So it does create my drop down, as you can see, but you might notice USA is not on my list. So this time when I actually go to type into it, USA, enter, it says, hey, are you sure? So it recognizes this is an unknown value, but it could be potentially right. So I have the option if I wish to say yes, and I can still continue with it. So that's using a drop down. Now, a lot of people ask me about covering VLOOKUPs. They cause more problems than any form in Excel, so I'm reluctant to rush showing people a VLOOKUP. But what I do want to show you is maybe the big brother to a VLOOKUP, which is what we call index and match. It's a far more powerful formula combination than using a VLOOKUP. Now, this data is perfectly demonstrated here because this is a matrix. VLOOKUP can only handle column by column. But my challenge here is I want to be able to pick out a month and pick out a country and then find the value that intersects at both points. So VLOOKUP has zero capability of doing that. You could make it really complicated and combine a number of HLOOKUPs and VLOOKUPs. By the way, HLOOKUP horizontal across the rows, VLOOKUP vertical down the columns. That's the difference. So I essentially want the best of both here. Now, to do that, we use a formula combination called index and match. Now, it's deemed to be very complicated, and a lot of users struggle with it. So there's a simple trick to it, and that is you break down the building of the formulas. So the first formula I'm going to use is the match function. And essentially what this is asking Excel is, where is it? Where is it positioned in the list? So I go equals M, I use match. What am I looking for? February, comma. Where am I looking in? I'll select my months, and a match formula must always end in 0. And you can see February there, that's going to give me a result of 2. So you can see February is in the 2nd position, and as you'd expect, December is in the 12th position. I now come over here and I'm going to do the same idea. The formula equals M, hit tab so I don't have to type the formula, it completes it for me, puts in the bracket, match, value I'm looking for, comma, where I'm looking in, and remember, a match formula always ends with 0 and false doesn't work like in a VLOOKUP. Oops, silly mistake. What have I done? Let me just look here. I'd like to say that's deliberate, but it's certainly not. It's the real world. So match, what am I looking? Oh, of course, sorry, the form is correct. USA doesn't exist. So that's why I'm getting an error. So that's kind of clever. So it's so if I put in a proper value, so there's nothing wrong with the form, it was just my data didn't exist. So that's good. Now, actually, we'll never let a crisis go to waste. So what I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to leave that error, and I want to show you a clever way of handling these type of errors. So when you get an error like that in Excel, and I should remember that, you know, if I'm building this for my colleagues, they're going to have the same problems. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to be a bit cuter, and rather than an error just sitting there and that's the end of it, I'm actually going to just, wasn't planning on showing you this, but it's the real world of Excel. I'm going to write an error handling formula around that. So I'm going to come into this and I'm going to tell the formula, if error, so if there's an error, I come out to the right, comma, and I'm going to tell it to say unknown country. That'll do. So what I've told Excel now is that if it brings up So for example, if I put in UK, there's no problem. But if I type in, well, I don't know what countries aren't on that. Portugal is, so I'll just type in Czech or something, or Slovakia, Slovika. So you will actually see here, I can continue, but if I do, it returns unknown country. So it's just a clever, if error is a really smart formula, you should know you can wrap it around any formula to handle an error. Okay, I'll put this back in now. And in this case, I'll just pick, I don't want them perfectly positioned. So I've gone back to my, and we can see my match formula. Now remember, match formula, what am I looking for? You click into cell, your range where you're looking in, and comma 0. So these formulas are relatively straightforward for what we're trying to do here. So that's the standard match. As you can see, it's not that difficult. Now, what I'm going to do this time though is, I'm now going to use the index. So let's try and understand the match formula. What am I looking for? This time it's going to be, where is it? I want to know where is it positioned. I'm going to pull it back here. So equals index, and I'm going to select my data set, Control Shift down and right, comma, I'm going to tell Excel, analyze 12 down, comma, 5 right, and tell me what's there. And the trick when you're testing this is always pick your last month, which is December. Always pick your last country, which I'm going to change to Portugal. And if the bottom right corner is good to go, they all should be good to go. Let's just have a look here. So December, yeah, so that's correct. You can see there the 19, so it's matching. Now, the problem with that though, that isn't that super complicated index and match combined, which is what people want. Well, the simple trick to building a mega formula is you break your formulas down, you guarantee they're correct, you just come back in and you start lifting the formulas out, Control C, escape, in I go here, I delete that cell, and I simply paste, and I can delete them as I go, and if there's a problem I'll see it, because I'm deleting the previous formula, and all I'm doing here is copying and pasting. And what we end up with is this mega complicated formula, but I didn't build it like that. I built it block by block, validated each form as I went, and then copied and pasted. So I can delete that now, and I can drive that entire spreadsheet. Remember, Excel can hold 1 million rows of data, and you can see the idea. Sorry, I don't need that either. And you can see the idea by picking the month, so it's working independently. So that's an index and match. It's the Big Brother to VLOOKUP. Again, I'm just trying to see it. Very hard to analyze that type of stuff here. Now, I'm going to have a quick look here at text, just watching the clock. I'm okay. Now, again, just pre-entered this data. So what I've actually done here now, guys, I'm dropping down a gear. Index and match is quite difficult. But I want to look at here, if you'd never used Excel before, or whether you're a very advanced user in Excel, back to the principle, we're only interested in learning the handy way, the easy way, not the hard way of using Excel. So I want to talk about formula structure. And if you can understand really simple basic formula structure, which is equals formula, open bracket, and it's the cell, and you close the bracket, that simple structure here will enable you to do 20 different formulas in Excel. So if you've never seen Excel before, you type equals, you put in a formula, you open a bracket, you click in a cell, and you close the bracket. So that's the structure. So I just want you to see that here. I'll just color code that so we can kind of see it. And now I'm going to use that structure, and I'm going to imagine somebody has given me a list of 20 formulas in Excel. I've never used Excel before, but I get this, equals, formula name, open bracket, click in the cell, close the bracket. So now I'm going to just demonstrate 4 or 5 here. I won't have time to do 20, obviously. It'll just take 20 seconds to do each one. So I'm going to go equals upper, open the bracket. So formula name, open the bracket, click in the cell, close. And I've converted my text to upper, equals lower. So I'm following the same pattern here. And I'm going to fix it. The classic one to get perfect typing of text for a mail merge or something, equals proper. Open the bracket, click in the cell, and you can see I've got Tom Smith proper here. You might notice here that there's a lot of gaps, kind of unnecessary gaps. I'll make this one a bit worse so we can see it. So that would look awful on mail merge. So I use, again, not learning anything new, just recycling the concept of formula. Somebody tells me try trim equals trim, open bracket, click in the cell, I close, and trim removes excessive spacing. And even sort of nightmare complex data here, I have 2 IBANs. So you can see that the GB, the UK IBAN looks much longer than the Irish one. Now I could sort of use my finger and count manually, but there's no need because I understand this basic structure. And I now go equals len, open bracket, click in the cell, and it actually counts the number of cells. So typical IBAN is 22. When we drag down, we see the UK IBAN has the exact same. So the len, so quick look again using the shortcut earlier on. I'm using this to go in, controlling button under escape, backquote button, and you'll see here the formulas I'm using so far and the concept that widened. I'll close my formulas again, and I'm just going to have one go here now at wrapping the formulas around. Again, nesting functions perceived as being very difficult, doesn't have to be. So I'm now going to try and fix both problems. So if you look at my data, I'll actually bring this one down, it's a little bit worse. So all my previous formulas have sort of half fixed it. You can see this is probably the best one, but I still have the gaps everywhere. So I'm going to actually go equals proper, open bracket, I click in the cell, I close, and that's half the fix. So now what I need to do is I need to nest. I need to use a nested function. I need to wrap one formula around another. Now, again, perceived as being very difficult, very simple principle. How do you nest functions? Well, very simply, step one, there's only ever one equals, no matter how complex the formula is. Where do you start the next formula? Back to the left. You just go right back to the left of the formula, to the right of the equals, type the next formula. Now, what do we know about this? We know every formula begins with an open bracket as you type it. So I go trim, open bracket, and just come out to the right, and I put in my final bracket. And hey presto, I have trimmed it and I've propered it at the exact same time. And now, just the last one here, if we look down at the bottom, this is complete nightmare data that I have here. I just put this a little bit higher so we can see. So in this case here, what I've done is I've exported this data from, maybe it could be a client list, a staff list, but the problem is it has muddled up all the data. So what I'm trying to do is get a text message, get a mobile number for each of my staff. So in the current climate, I can send a text message out to people to update them in terms of policies during the crisis, whatever. But the problem is all the numbers are kind of buried. But there are numbers in there. Look, 085 123 4567. I have my mobile here, and I have a colleague of mine mobile here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract the mobiles out of it. It's almost using the technique. The trick you got to do before you approach these kind of complex, difficult, kind of unclear ways of working, the step one is you try and verbalize what you're trying to do. So if you can't articulate it in words, you can't articulate it in a formula. So let's take a closer look at my data. What I need to do, if we look at it, I need to go in and find the zero. If we look here, there's a zero starting with each mobile number, and I need to lift 10 characters from that position out of it. So I'm going to instruct Excel, find 0 first of all, and then take 10 characters from that point. So this time I'm going to go equals find, click in the cell. Find is an unusual form. I always forget this. It's kind of bucks the trend. You have to firstly tell it what you're looking for, which is 0, comma, and then where to look in. Every other form I've demonstrated, you see the idea. You pick the cell first. Find is a bit quirky. And I hit find, and it figures out, well, the 0 is in the 6th position in this cell. But when I drag down here, it's the 15th here and it's the 7th. Now I could wrap the next formula around this, but to make it a bit clearer for people watching, I'm going to demonstrate it in the column to the right and see. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use mid equals mid, open bracket, select the cell, comma, where I want to start lifting from. Now, if I type in a 6 here, I'm in trouble because that's not dynamic. I need to click in the 6 so the cell picks up, so it'll roll down as I go, comma 10. And I've told Excel basically go into A13, start from the 6th position and extract 10, and hey presto, there is the mobile numbers extracted out of it. So that's a mid and a find formula moving together. Okay, chugging along, I'm going to go to dates. Again, I will look at the comments as we go along, trying to, again, make it not too difficult and not too easy. Now, I actually meant to delete this, so that's okay. I'll just delete it here very quickly. And probably deleting isn't very good with dates, actually. What I should do is to really get rid of that data, I should use clear all. Otherwise, I'll have formatting problems left behind me, etc. So we're going to look at dates here. And again, I've just kind of put this here to keep me honest on what I should be showing you. Now, when it comes to dates, so we're going to look at what's need to know, not nice to know in dates. The key thing you need to know about dates in Excel is the handy way of putting today's date in. You use that more than any other date in Excel. And the quick, easy way of doing it is just to the left of your @ symbol, to the right of the L on your keyboard, you've got colon, semicolon. Control and colon is the shortcut for today's date. So I'll do that again, control and colon. So it's just to the right of the L is today's date. If you want to use the time, you go control shift colon and you hit enter. Control shift colon again, as we see. And if we actually even look here now, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to drop this down, control shift plus, because what I want to do here is I want to show you how you could use them both together. I'm just going to check my formatting is erased fully, so clear all. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the two shortcuts together, control and colon for the date, space, control shift colon for the time, and I've logged the date and time into Excel. So if I worked in an industry like logistics, I could actually track date of departure, date of arrival, and if I had a KPI of delivering something in 72 hours to a client, I could actually track this from one to the other. So it's very clever. When you write them manually, it's clunky, it's prone to errors, and sometimes you end up typing them in as text, not dates. So you should always avoid typing dates manually. Now, everything here is static. It doesn't change. Now, if there was one key thing that would kind of game change your Excel, it's if you could get today's date to update itself, because that's the problem. Most spreadsheets are out of date tomorrow because time moves on. So the key formula for dates is to put in a live date calculation, really easy, equals today, open bracket, close bracket, and I hit enter, and that will always calculate to today's date. So if I'm an organization like Smith's Toys and I have a countdown to Christmas, today's date every time I open Excel will automatically move forward and giving me the number of days. So it's a little bit like what I'm actually going to do down here now. So if we look here, that's the Christmas day here, or sorry, the end of year. Underneath it, I'm going to put in today's date. Now if I go control colon, it's static. So what would be better is to use equals today, open bracket, close bracket. And now I go equals future date minus today. And that will actually work out. There are 266 calendar days between now and the end of year. And because that's today, tomorrow it will give me an answer 265. And if I'm doing credit control or sales, whatever, a whole range of KPI tracks, you could use that for end of month, end of quarter, etc. Very useful for projects. When I'm scheduling a project, I often need to take into account the actual real number of working days, which is not just Saturdays and Sundays, it's bank holidays as well. Which leads me now down here. So what I want to look at now is how we calculate working days. So first of all, let's have a quick look here. I'll put in the live date again, equals today. And year end is my 31st of the 12th, 20. And now we should get the same answer here, I think. So it's going to be equal year end minus 266. So that's a sort of a sense check to make sure everything is good, which it is. Now, what I want to do this time is I want to not calculate the Saturdays and Sundays. So in that case, I use the network days function. So NET, you see network days. So network days is for calculating working days. Relatively straightforward formula to use. Network days, I pick my start date, comma, and then I pick my end date. And we're going to know for sure it's going to be a lot less than 266, otherwise I've made a mistake. And we can see there are 191 Monday to Fridays in that time, as opposed to 266 calendar days. But I want to even take it a step further this time. And I want to take into account, we have a range of bank holidays here that have to be factored in as well. So again, almost the same idea, chance to see network days again. So network days, my start date, comma, my end date. And now this is the important bit, comma, and I need to select all my bank holidays. Now the problem here when you do this, guys, if you're dragging this down, the bank holidays are going to roll down. It's a problem of rolling cells. So I need to use an absolute cell reference, the dollars in Excel. Handy way of doing it, I just press F4, and you can actually see now, I just drop this back a little bit so we can see the form. I just tighten the other columns, but you can actually see it now dropped from 191 down to 188, which is taking into account my 3 holidays. So start date, finish date, and then the bank holidays. So it's quite straightforward how we do it. Now, just coming back up here to look now at filling. So it's still related to dates. I'm just going to best fit these columns, select them, double click between any one of them, and they all widen to the perfect fit. Now, I'm going to put in today's date, and I'll just get rid of that formatting. I actually don't like that. So what I'm going to do here now is I want you to notice that when you drag down or double click in Excel, it is dynamic. Dates are dynamic. Let's have a look at this. Numbers are static. Whoa, so there's a little problem in Excel. So that's a kind of nightmare of formatting. Easy fix to it. Well, the handy way, well, if you're into the hard way, you start messing around here with going into format cells. Control 1 is a shortcut, by the way, but there's no need for that. You just pick a standard value. So look for any sort of standard value. So watch this. If I just put in, doesn't even have to, well, so there's formatting on that. So this is the headache of Excel. So I'm going to remove just the formatting. Clear formats. Now that should be a number. It's a date. I just pick standard kind of Excel, and I can go paintbrush, and it formats it back to a number. And by the way, I didn't even have to do that. It was kind of just caught up in the moment. So a little look here, I could have actually just picked the blank cell, because as you move away from the area you're working in, these problems, these formatting issues disappear, and hit the paintbrush and just click on the dodgy date, which should be a number, and it changes back as we can see. Now, let's just come back and understand what are we doing here. So I was showing you when you drag with a date, they are dynamic. You drag with a number, they are static. I'm sure most people are aware of that. But the real trick here is, how do you change a dynamic to a static fill? And very simply, watch now, I put in my 1 here. I'm just going to use a little shortcut to carry over in case I have a formatting problem. Control or will carry it over for me. Now, so in this case, I'm going to drag down as normal. Now, if I let go, it's going to give me 111 as we see. But let's take a closer look. I drag down, and just before I let go, I hold Control, and that forces it to become the opposite. Likewise with the date. So if we go back to look at the date here, and I drag it down, once I hold Control before I let go, it keeps it static. Now, I just do one really difficult calculation, but in a super simple way. Month end is one of the most difficult calculations in Excel. So it's 31st to the 12th, 20. Now the problem with that is this year is extremely difficult. Sorry, 31st to the 1st I should really use. This is quite difficult because we have a leap year this year. Now the sort of default difficult way how people approach this is they might say, well, we do a VLOOKUP, we look at how many days are in the month, then we link it to another VLOOKUP, and we look to see if there's a leap year or not. So that's super complicated Excel. We're interested in super easy Excel. So I can actually do that sort of nested VLOOKUP function. I can avoid the whole thing by just, instead of dragging with my left mouse button, I drag with my right mouse button instead, and simply tell Excel, fill months, and you can even see it picked up the leap year. I just undo that. So very little is happening. Instead of dragging with a left, I'm going to drag with a right, and you see it change into a white arrow. Fill months, and we've it done. Same idea, by the way, if I want to skip the weekends, you don't need a formula. Format here. Now, so we don't need a formula to do that. If I want to skip the Saturdays and Sundays, I just drag with the right mouse button. Down I go, and I tell it fill weekdays. And you can see there, the 11th and 12th that skipped, etc. So that's just a little look at dates. Absolute I've kind of covered really, but I'll just, I'm going to fly on actually. I think we're okay with that. I'm going to go to pivot tables actually, because I know a lot of people wanted to look at pivots, so asked me to cover pivots. So I'm going to just jump to pivots watching the clock. Now, I can certainly do a follow-up on this another time. Now, so just a quick look here, guys. This is classic. I've exported data into Excel. All my columns are sort of crunched up. I can't see my data. So first thing I'm going to do is just to try and make it legible in case I have to print it. I click in the box above the one, left of the A. I double click between any two column headings, and it widens all the columns to the perfect width as such. Now the next thing I'm going to do before I do anything, I need to know what am I dealing with. Is there 100 rows in this or is there 100,000? So Control and down will fly me down to the end, and I can see there's 1,760 rows in this. So Control and arrows are jump techniques, but Control, Shift and arrows are select techniques. Now, so I'm going to look at this from a pivot point of view. Now I'm just watching the clock here. So my goal here is just to kind of put this in some sort of context. We can see the raw sheet here. I want to show you, with this spreadsheet, I'm going to build a series of pivots, but ultimately what I'm going to do is I'm going to process about 700 formulas and 40 independent reports without using a single formula, and really with a few clicks and drags of the mouse is all I'm going to do. But let's just take a look at a basic pivot first. So I'll do that because it'll take no more than 2 minutes to do it. I'll do that at the end, but let's just try and understand pivots. Step one, you have a raw data source. You notice I call the sheet raw. Imagine it's coming in from another system. You do not need to select. There's a myth about you need to select everything for pivots. You don't. You just need to be in a single cell, insert pivot table. Now Excel picks up and it sees, well, there is raw data, A1 to 1760. Now the problem with that, guys, is if I add more data to it later, my pivot's going to be wrong. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tell Excel, I want you to understand my raw data is dynamic. I might export into it every day. I want to refresh, and I want my pivot tables to rebuild itself. So I'm going to convert this from a static range to a dynamic range. To do that, I just go Control A and Control T, and that's it, as simple as that. 2 seconds, enter. I've told Excel you're to be dynamic. So the pivot is no longer looking at cells, it's looking at the entire sheet. Let me undo that if I can. It's so important, so simple, but we need to understand the biggest thing you can do to make a pivot much better, reduce your errors. You build it once, you build it right, and you can reuse it again and again. So Control A, Control T, and it becomes a table. I hit enter. Now it's going to give a silly name to that. So I'm going to actually go in and find the table and give it a better name. So I go Formulas, Name Manager, and it's called it Table 2, which I don't like. So I'm going to edit that. And instead I'm going to call it car underscore list, because you can't have spaces in a named range. So we'll see that. So now it's called car list. But I want you to fully understand what it means to have dynamic data. I go Control and down to the end. And when I go to type the next car, so I'll just go forward here. Now look what happens as I hit enter. You can actually see it's extending down. Let me just type in again here, Kia. So you can see the range is extending. As I change that, it's saying, I got you, you're after adding rows to it. So the concept of ending at 1760 is now meaningless, which is a good thing. I'll delete that because I don't have time to type in full rows. I'll jump back up and now look at this, insert pivot table. And it's now recognizing, hey, I'm always going to use your car list. It doesn't matter if there's 10 rows in it or 10,000, I will dynamically change. I hit OK. And what actually happens now, as you can see, if you're familiar with pivots, it creates, I'll just try and zoom this if I can a bit. So it creates this field list on the right. And the essence of pivots is you move column headings into boxes. Now the trick is to have a technique to make it super easy. And I don't like the default layout. I don't think it has the structure and the simplicity you need to build good pivots. So I never use this layout. I come up here to the little cog and I tell it not to use stack, to use side by side. Now all it's going to do is it's going to reposition the 4 boxes, and you can see my 4 boxes have now gone to the right instead of to the bottom. The issue is the 4 boxes underneath, it doesn't recognize that there should be a process in how you build, that the 4 boxes are not equal. So the key thing now is once you switch to side by side, your next approach to a pivot is I always build bottom up, which means you start with values. Why? Because values calculates, and none of the other 3 boxes have a calculating capability. So if you're not using values, you're not getting any benefit from your pivot. So what I'll now do is I'll drag my price in here, and I drop it, and we know it sums it. Now if I drag text in, by the way, like color, it will count it. So just to understand technically, what does that mean? Well, values calculates, numbers get summed, and text gets counted. That's the backbone of values, which is 80% of the power of a pivot. Now, when you drag anything in there, you'll always have to give it a little tidy up, a little polish. You can see the formatting here is very poor, very amateur looking name, sum of price. So I'm just going to go to the drop down, value field settings, and I'm going to rename it to sales. And I'm going to put a little bit of formatting on it. You never format using standard buttons above, because they'll only format the cells. I want to format the pivot. So I've now told it, well, to rename it, and you can see now it's called sales, and the formatting is a little bit more consistent. Now what I'm going to do, so think about this, values, I now work my way up, and we understand column and row together. What do these do? They list one of each, and they never show a duplicate, which is kind of hard to digest until you see it. So let's think about this. I have 1,700 cars. You know, I've got 30 Alphas, 30 BMWs, 40 Citroens, whatever it may be. But remember, one of each and no duplicates. So now when I drag franchise in here, you can see 1 Alpha, 1 Audi, but I don't think it's that readable horizontally. So I'm just going to switch it up to row, and there is a very simple but very powerful pivot. So I basically crunched it. Now the key thing you need to understand about pivots, all of these calculations can be interrogated, almost like a drill through capability. So when I see a large figure like Ford and I'm wondering where did that come from, now there's no problem with the formula as an error because Excel calculated, not I. But if I want to see, well, what are you using for that? I just double click and I can dynamically drill into it, and you can see it's showing me a spreadsheet, and it's showing me all my different Ford cars. So it just creates a kind of a temporary or kind of rubbish spreadsheet here. It's of no real value to me, but it allows me to see, control down. No wonder the figure is so high. There's 171 Fords. I'll delete that because I have a lot of sheets there. But that's just very important, a drill through capability. Now, when we looked at charts earlier, you saw me using F11 to build a chart. What I'm going to do this time is F11 here. I don't even have to select because pivots are a little bit different. And I've now built a pivot chart in half a second. So I just be active in the pivot, hit F11, and it builds a pivot for me. Now, what I'd like to do is analyze my data from top to bottom because I want to analyze the bottom 5. But it's very hard to see them there. Now, the trick to Excel, and I can't emphasize this enough, try and use your existing knowledge. Don't go off and learn something new. So something that I would imagine most people are aware of in Excel is the idea on when I go in here, well, we could sort the data. So yes, you can sort a chart in a pivot, no problem. But let's use our existing knowledge. So I come in here and I go to data and I just hit A to Z and I end up sorting the spreadsheet, which is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But the key thing to remember, that is driving your chart. And I've now sorted the chart accordingly. Now, I'm going to call this pivot main. So it's my first pivot. And I'm going to do another pivot. Now, the trick is you don't start from scratch. Using the opening shortcut, I drag it a little bit to the right, hold control, and I get main 2, and I'm going to rename it now to detailed, which is essentially the exact same pivot. I'm just going to sort it back alphabetically. I'm watching the clock here, guys. So now I'm going to have a go at building these 40 reports and 700 calculations. And all I'm going to do really is use exactly what I've done before, but I'm going to drop something into filters. This box, people don't understand how powerful this is, and it's really a game changer. So again, my price is in there, which is fine. My franchise is in there. But what I want to do now, I'm almost imagining this is, I want to do an audit of all the sales. I'm going to drop model underneath franchise. And as you can see, it gives me a breakdown of the make and the model. I want to know, well, how many Alphas were sold? You know, for example, Audi A4, 127. How many Audi A4s were sold? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag model in again here to values. and it counts how many of each. Again, I'll just tidy up the name here a bit, and I'll call it units maybe. Just to be clear how I did that, the drop-down value field settings is where you do your tidying. And what I now want to do is I want to work out the average. Now, this is classic Excel mistake. Somebody goes in here and they go equals and they start messing around. So that's the worst thing you can do. In a pivot, you do all your work on the right. It is not standard Excel. It's almost like a sub-program within Excel. So all the work happens in the right in the 4 boxes. We never manually edit anything here. So average is a formula. So I'm going to drag price into values, which creates a duplicate, which is pretty useless because I have it already. But I go back to my drop-down arrow here, value field. I change it to average. I'll tidy up the name a little bit just to call it average. Number format, currency, no decimals, and OK. Now, in this case here, I've now got the average. I'm going to rearrange my columns. I don't like the layout. I'm just going to drag them over here. And I'm going to move units maybe to the top, average to the middle. You can actually see now, I just find that a little bit more readable. So you don't cut and paste columns, you just rearrange in the values box. So you can see here, if we look, we've 3 formulas across, control and down, and I have 232 formulas down. So I have my 700 formulas. Now the problem with that in the real world is it's too busy. That is too confidential. So what I want to do is I want to create a sub report for each of those, but I don't want to do a whole big cut, copy, paste job. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the filters box. This is kind of the most powerful area of pivots, and most Excel users don't use it. So all I do now is I move franchise up to filters. Now, how you always need to think of filters, it's a sub-reporting capability in your pivot. So I move franchise up. Now, again, unfortunately, there are 1,400 buttons in new Excel, and Microsoft have a tendency to bury or hide the good commands here. So you'll never find this button unless you know where it is. So I go into my Analyze tab in the pivot, and I go to Options. Now, this is very important here. You do not click on Options. That's not what we're looking for. This is buried deep. It's well hidden. You go to the tiny little arrow to the right of Options, and I pick Show Report Filter Pages. And what you're actually going to see here, it's going to break it down by every subcategory. Now I'm just going to try and move the Excel sheets along here so you can see this. This is pretty game-changing what's going to happen. So I want you to look at my sheet tabs down here at the bottom, guys. I might move raw to that side. In fact, yeah, that's okay. So now let's take a look here. So I go to, make sure I'm in detailed. Now I put franchise here. I go to that Analyze, little drop down, Show Report Filter Pages. Now I want you to watch my sheet tabs as I hit OK, ready, steady, go, bang. And it's actually flying through. And if you look now, it has built a separate report for every one of those. You can actually see there as I go along, I now have a sub report for each of those. So it's super powerful. I've done probably 100 hours of manual work in 3 or 4 minutes using pivot tables. Super powerful command. Okay, 10:59. I'm gonna, with a few seconds to go. So I'm gonna turn on the mics now if you want. Just maybe people want to ask me a few questions. I might just say to you as well, guys, just one small thing before I do that. I might just stop sharing this screen. And I want to just share a different screen with you so you can see how I actually do this. So I'm going to go here to share screen. And I want to just show you here for a second. So can everyone see my PowerPoint okay, guys? Can we? Maybe give me a thumb up, somebody. So just to show you how I actually teach now remotely, I just put a bit of time into this. So when I'm teaching, I've just picked Microsoft projects, part of a diploma I'm teaching. So this is my screen here. I can see my class. It's the exact same as being in front of people. I can see them here. And on my laptop, I can verify that they're definitely seeing what I'm seeing. So I can't do that obviously with 500 people on the call. But so essentially, to me, it's the exact same. I have a whiteboard behind me and I have another camera. I can switch onto a whiteboard if I need to explain something on a board. But I just want you to see that nothing has changed as far as I'm concerned. I have my screen, I have my students, I can look them in the eye, I can take control of their screen if they need help.